Alright, so here we are again. So in the last video we ended up just talking briefly, going over this chart here about folk versus popular culture. So we're going to expand on that in this video, talking at the very different ways we talk about folk becoming pop culture, just the differences between them in a variety of different ways. So in class, think about how each type of music is diffused differently, if at all, and so how do some of them represent initial folk culture, and how might some of them have gone from folk to pop culture. So again, this is going to be something you're going to have more of an assignment to do, or related to that. Think about something like jazz or hip hop, or as kind of they start off kind of more in the folkish realm, and then become more current modern pop, where it's kind of diffused globally around the world. Or in the example of Ravi Shankar and sitar music from India, becoming part of popular culture when you click on those links. So that is something definitely that you're going to have to look back at and think about how those become popular, or why they become part of pop culture through music. All right, because again, that can change based on who's creating it, who's using it, and then the idea of also cultural appropriation fits in as well. So we'll talk about that too. So folk cultures often become popular over time, or at least a number of them do. So something like soccer, also known as football, getting started in England, then it's diffused as a result of trade, and then also colonialization and imperialism, to the fact that it is considered the global sport of the world. And so that is something that you consider, is something of culture or folk culture becoming popular and being global all over the world, because it is a sport that is practiced in every facet of the globe to some extent. Same thing with cricket, again, being another type of English sport that is played predominantly by countries that England had under its grasp, and again with colonialism and imperialism for a long time. So like cricket is very, very big in India and in Pakistan. Hockey predominantly, and we get to see a familiar logo and squad there. Again, starting out in North America and essentially being resigned in North America, and then also colder climates as a result, not really getting as big of a spread. But then, you have some that are very popular predominantly in the place where they start and remain there. Things like, lacrosse or American football. To a lesser extent, you can think baseball and basketball, because those have become more popular over time. But again, starting off kind of as a folk culture or kind of an American pastime or American sports, slowly gaining style over time in various different parts of the globe as a result of that. And the book also mentions the folk culture and the sports. But again, they become more popular as a result of money, a result of international competitions, popularization through things like the Olympics and the World Cup, megastars and things like that, and investments in time and money to make them become popular. Same thing with the transition from folk to pop music too. All right. So when we're talking about folk culture style, particularly clothing, food, and housing are essentially within folk culture a response to climate, the environment, available resources, and preference. They wear stuff that is socially acceptable and expected to wear in your cultural group. So like me, I wear yarmulke, which is written like this, even though it's not pronounced yarmulks, it is yarmulke. It's just kind of the Hebrew translation there. Jewish women, especially Orthodox Jewish women, not all Jewish women, very small percentage, wear wigs when they are outside of the home. Burqas and hijabs, that really never got, I'm going to edit that real quick here, sorry. And then hijabs, not hijbas, okay, hijabs for Muslim women, again, trying to, cover their clothing, all right, or wearing it for a particular reason related to, again, cultural and religious reasons, all right. In many cases, people might still wear folk cultural clothing, but not for the old reasons, or not as often for the old reasons. Part of that could be to attract tourists, depending on if you're going to a country. So, think about Scottish people wearing, the kilts and having the bagpipe and the hats, or Japanese women wearing kimonos in various restaurants and things like that. Again, it's more of a cultural attraction, but it's actually what we call cultural appropriation, which is, again, something we'll talk about and have stuff on at the end. It's sort of a preservation of culture and a reminder of culture, but also being used to kind of entice people and making that part of pop culture. All right, and we'll have more stuff on that. So when we talk about the style of clothing, think about clothing worn in Minnesota versus California, or the types of food in the Midwest versus the East Coast. So here we have the Dutch people wearing clogs and their formal wear, and again, you don't really see a whole lot of people wearing this stuff anymore. Again, it's more for traditional things, and also, again, a tourist attraction. The American and Indian peoples and indigenous peoples of the United States dressing in formal tribal wear, more for events. It's not a daily thing, and it wasn't a daily thing to dress up like this either. These are for religious ceremonies and cultural ceremonies. While Orthodox Jewish men will dress like this almost every single day, because they believe that is the practical way to dress, more based on tradition and how they're not necessarily all their ancestors, but for several generations have dressed, despite the fact that if you're living in like New York or Miami, hot places on the globe, this is not exactly the most comfortable style of clothing, but that is the expectation, right? So when we talk about clothing, we also talk about innovation and invention. So an invention is creating something that has not yet existed before. So the Yupik parka, shown down here, okay, creation of a jacket to sustain people in the Arctic winter, is part of folk culture, okay? That was, you needed to, hunt animals and wear their, furs and skins to keep yourself warm. And so that's kind of where that came from, okay? The innovation, think about this in terms of, again, stimulus, diffusion, acculturation, okay? Taking something that already existed and either finding a new use for it or you make changes to it. So North Face takes the idea of the parka and uses different material to make it pop culture in the sense of this. Or you think about that with, Canadian Goose is another big one there, right? So it takes the idea of this and applies it here for people that live in those colder climates and who may be a little more adverse to wearing fur. Okay, when we talk about pop culture style, especially in terms of clothing, as we've said before, comes from that specific origin. So you think about Converse, Skechers, Nike as being specific brands and diffusing rapidly due to technology and advertisements and access to those things. And again, varies more in time than in place due to that, and it can continually change what is considered hip or in style. All right, and one other thing that might limit your knowledge or awareness or ability to get these is, can you afford it? Or does this actually affect you? Do these styles of clothing appeal to you, and does that matter? So going further with that within pop culture clothing, okay, pop culture clothing typically reflects three things. One, your occupation. Are you dressing for your certain profession and how you want people to view you? All right, a doctor is essentially going to be wearing scrubs when they are in an operating room, or they will be wearing a lab coat or overcoat, like the white kind of coat, over said scrubs while they are in the hospital. All right, a lawyer is going to dress in for their essentially a suit or something like that, very formal, in order to again convey their occupation, their position, their prestige. Same thing with a politician or a leader. You don't see a leader sitting, you don't see a politician, a governor, a mayor, a senator, or president sitting back in sweats all the time, right? Because there's a view to how they're supposed to come off and present themselves, right? So how does a principal dress differently than a teacher, right? If you know Mr. Sakala, he hardly ever dresses, I don't think I've ever really seen him wear blue jeans. But he'll typically be wearing khakis or dress pants almost every single day. So that's very different. And as you all know, I'm someone who wears fairly casual clothes, at least, semi-casual. I'm wearing a lot of assembly gear from time to time, but I'm also, I got this stuff on. I'm wearing khakis right now. But again, I'm not going to wear dress clothes every day. And that's something that's very much a change in American society because you go back 30 plus years and that was the expectation is you're wearing, think about Mr. Gingrich, if you know him, a shirt and tie almost every single day as a teacher. That is not as much of an expectation anymore due to changing culture. Another factor here is income. Wear what you can afford. It's easier to keep up and wear the modern in fashions if you have the money to afford it. So you're going to be wearing, things that are in style as long as you have the means to wear those. So one reason why many schools actually enforce dress code policies where everyone wears a uniform is to avoid, differences within income statuses. Not that I'm suggesting that, but that's a reason why some schools do that. And then preference, what you think is cool and comfortable on top of the other two criteria. So at the end of the day, what does it come down to? For me, I'm someone who dresses based on occupation, income, and preference because, if I can be comfortable in what I'm wearing, I'm going to try and do that as often as possible. All right. So yeah, due to technology and globalization, many people now wear more popular clothes while others might still wear their traditional ones while others take on traditional clothing. Think about this in terms of Halloween and how controversial that's become in the last few years. With folk clothing, again, tying into cultural appropriation. Both may stir controversy because, again, cultural appropriation does that. And then in some cases, there's a religious restriction on wearing religious clothing. In the book, there's a little sidebar in there about should Muslim women be allowed to wear the veil or should Should that be illegal? Should that be banned? Same thing with any type of religious clothing, not just about Jews and Muslims, but that's kind of who it affects the most, right? And I think this image itself, I think it says everything about cultural appearances and expectations. So I'm not going to talk about it. Again, if we're in class, we'll mention it more. But I think this highlights a lot of stuff about cultural expectations and awareness. So I think definitely worth your time to look at. This is a funny video from SNL about, again, pop culture clothing and how, stores and people are trying to keep up with trends. So tying into food culture, right? And if we have to make this into a second video, we'll do so. Okay, it depends when we talk about folk food culture. Depends, again, climate, environment, available resources, and again, preference. So it's different foods coming from different regions because of differences in the soil. Okay, not everything grows in the same location or in the same terrain. The soil might only allow for so much to be grown or so many types of certain varieties of food to be grown. The climate, obviously, is a very big factor. So when we talk about the agricultural unit, which is actually a favorite of mine, we'll expand more on this in terms of where things are grown and why. But, again, this is very much a reason for why, if you talk about traditional dishes for people from places like India or China or Mexico or Italy. Italy, we don't really, the Italian food isn't exactly the Italian food. But, again, it comes back to, what were cultural traditions and why were things grown and made the way they were is based, again, on this stuff. All right, and then we have this word here, terroir, not terror, not terroir. Okay, it's terroir. Okay, it's a French word, and that's the sum of the location's distinctive features. So again, the terrain, the climate, and the soil on the way that food tastes. So something that is, we take, an apple grown in one part of America in, New York is going to taste different from an apple that's grown in Minnesota, based again on these factors and what else is put in there. So Asia, rice is grown in milder climates, wheat is grown in colder, drier regions. In Northern Europe, there's a lot of wood to allow for stewing and roasting your food over open pits. As opposed to, again, these two things. So again, it's very different based on, the food that you're making, but also how you make it and how you prep it. So very different. So we talk about taboos. So people will eat or avoid to eat certain foods because of how the culture views it. So that's kind of at the very end of, what's available, how do you grow it, how can you grow it, to what do people want to eat versus not want to eat. All right, so some examples here. So the Maasai tribe in Kenya, still very much within folk culture today, to an extent. Drinking of cow's blood for celebration or the healing of the sick is something that is thought to be very good. The Ainu people in Japan, avoid eating otters. Otters are thought to be forgetful, so thus if you eat an otter, you will lose your memory. So again, that's more of a cultural thing than anything else. Hindus do not eat cows. It's thought to be a gift from the gods as they provide milk, which is the basis for other food products, think cheese, butter, so on and so forth. And they can also be used for help in farming, because cows and oxen pull plows. So thus, you should not eat an animal that is going to provide you so many other things. All right. And that's kind of the reason behind that. Papua New Guinea, anyone who eats the food a menstruating woman cooks or even steps over, that person, or particularly the husband, will become ill with cough and possibly die. So again, that's more of a cultural fear, based on cultural practices, right? So taboos, restriction on behavior imposed by social customs. So we talk about, that's the definition of a taboo. Food taboos exist because of a number of different things. Environmental protection of animals. So limiting of whale hunting due to them almost being extinct at this point. Environmental issues, and then what sets a group apart. So two examples here within kind of the same idea of food preferences between Jewish and Muslim people. Jews have kosher food, at least those that follow it. I, for the most part, follow it. I'm not the strictest of people, but I'm fairly observant. Others are not. So Jews don't typically eat pork for a variety of reasons, at least more traditional Jews don't. Jews were initially nomads, 40 years in the desert. Pigs are not suited for, being kept well. They spoil very quickly in the heat, all right, such as the Mediterranean and the Middle East where they were from, all right. Muslims and pigs, on top of the meat spoiling quickly, pigs, Muslim belief is also pigs typically live in filthy conditions. So, think about how they roll around in the dirt and the mud and they don't really care. So it's thought to be filthy if you eat it, as well as the fact that pigs compete with humans for the exact same types of food and resources. They don't really provide milk that we drink. There's no wool from them. They don't pull plows. So thus, they're not worth eating, and they're not worth having around. So when we come back, then there's this stimulus diffusion again with food. mixture for me with Matzo Pizza to do that, and then you can kind of go on with the other pieces about what's popular in local areas.